big announcement to make. And Kenneth, who better to make it with you on the line? Beginning January 8th, the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour now is expanding. We will be in Washington, D.C. We'll be in the nation's capital. We will be on WFAX, that's 1220 radio in Washington, D.C., prime time on the weekend. So Kenneth T. Walsh and all the Hutchinson Report newsmakers that certainly appear on the show, you will now not only be able to hear the Los Angeles and environs, but also, by the way, not just Washington, D.C., but also northern parts of Maryland, all the way up to Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia. So it's going to be a wide area. So now the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour, that makes it official, January 8th. We are coming to the nation's capital. All right, Kenneth T. Walsh, before we left, I had actually a three-part question. The candor, rating the presidents from Reagan to Obama, and also not just candor with the press, but also candor with the American people.
Right. Well, first of all, congratulations on your expanding presence. That's terrific.
Well, thank you very much.
And to answer your question, of the 5 presidents I've covered, it might surprise your listeners to hear this, but President Bush, the father, was actually probably the most candid and the most accessible, particularly in the beginning of his administration. As time went on, particularly in his last year, he got angry with the news media. He felt that we were being unfair to him. But in his first 3 years or so, he was very accessible. He had many, many news conferences. In the very beginning, he was having news conferences almost every week. And he would call on virtually everybody in the room. He'd stay there until every reporter had a question or wanted to ask a question. That's pretty rare. So he was really committed to doing that. And he also would be quite candid when he talked to you. Part of it, his advisors felt he was too candid because, you know, the old saying in Washington, telling the truth gets people in trouble a lot of times. So they try not to do that. But President Bush was pretty open about it. But I think the second president who was very open regularly was Bill Clinton. Now, that was a roller coaster ride because Bill Clinton loved to talk. He loved to express his opinions and had a lot of views on a lot of things. He would then pull back sometimes when he got angry with the media, and he would then shut down. But then he would always come back and be talkative again. So I think, but in general, Bush the father was probably the most accessible and the most open, as I say, until the very end.
Now, one of the, and also President Obama, you'd rate him, well, actually, as you said before, he's kind of a horse of a different color. He is very professorial, but at the same time, he's cautious, picks his spots, but there does seem to be some accessibility because every president must understand, and I think President Obama, like any other president, understands there might be some contentiousness, there might be some adversarial relationship that presidents have with the press, and there also must be some wariness, too. But at the end of the day, you need the press because you got to get the word out, and I think presidents understand that.
Right. That's exactly right. Well, I teach courses in communication and journalism, and a lot of my students ask me, well, how can you really get to know a president really well? Well, unfortunately, these days, and this has been true throughout my time, my 25 years or so covering the White House, it's really not like it used to be. The reporters who covered President Kennedy say that sometimes they'd be invited for off-the-record chats or drinks with him. Ben Bradley, formerly of the Washington Post, at that time with Newsweek, got to know President Kennedy very well. They became actually very close friends. You don't see that anymore with reporters and presidents because both sides are too cynical and both sides really don't trust each other. I mean, sometimes President Obama does off-the-record meetings, but generally, with reporters, but generally he doesn't say anything because he's just concerned. He wants to establish a relationship, but he's aware that he can get burned if he's too candid, and something that seems to be off the record often does not stay off the record. So you have this sort of barrier between the media and individual reporters on one side, such as myself, and the president, because of the cynicism that's crept into the White House. Now, some people would say that's good because you don't want reporters in the pocket of a presidency or of a White House. But on the other hand, while that's true, you don't want to be too cozy with people. It does help to know a president as well as you can, to understand the decisions the president is making, And we really have lost a lot of that in the relationship between the White House and the press corps these days.
I'm going to turn it back on you, Kenneth T. Walsh. We've got about 1 minute left before we've run out of time. As you always know, on any show, the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour, no exception. The issues certainly are trumping everything, but time trumps the issues. We got about 60 seconds left. Question: if you had to assess overall, and just a wrap-up look of your 25 years, going all the way back to mid-Reagan years now to President Obama, do you feel that the press generally, and there's been criticism of the press too as being biased, that the press has treated the president, in this case President Obama, fairly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one to think that something I learned early on in my career, that presidents, public officials tend to get the coverage they deserve. That doesn't mean that every president gets perfect coverage. It doesn't mean every story is correct or fully comprehensive or balanced. But I think over time, through the media, Americans get quite a good sense of what their president's all about and what they're like. And I think that's true for President Obama. Sometimes it takes a while. I mean, for instance, I don't think that we fully understood President Nixon as well as we should have. Not that I was covering President Nixon, but based on history. President Obama, I think some Americans are still trying to figure him out, whether he's a liberal, whether how much he will compromise and so on. But I think over time, and I think his presidency is a work in progress, so we can't be definitive right now. But I think over time, with the saturation coverage that a president gets from all different perspectives, I think a viewer or a listener or a reader would get a good sense of the president by diversifying his or her, news consumption and reading or taking in a lot of different news outlets. And then I think a person can really get a good sense of what a president's all about.
All right. Thank you very much. Kenneth T. Walsh, we certainly, it's been a great conversation. We certainly appreciate you appearing on the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour from time to time. You're right there in Washington, and now so are we. We'd like to bring you back to the Hutchinson Report Newsmaker Hour as issues come up. Just give a little commentary, your thoughts and views on it from inside the White House. So you have a standing invitation. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. All right, that was Kenneth T. Walsh, Chief White House Correspondent for U.S. News and World Report, 1/4 century, going back to the mid-Reagan presidency all the way up to President Obama. That's someone who's watched presidents up close in recent times, and he seems to know quite a bit about what presidents not only are thinking, but most importantly, but what they're saying, too. And they all go hand in hand. So, having said that, we once again want to reiterate the announcement, the big announcement. Beginning January 8th, the Hutchinson Report is expanding. You know you can watch us on HutchinsonReport.tv. You know you can, we're archived on blogtalkradio.com, internet radio. You also know that we're streamed on KTYM.com, our global stream. Obviously, we're on KTYM, 1460 AM. But guess what? Beginning January 8th, the same show that we're doing here is going national, bi-coastal, in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill, on WFAX 1220, and it will be aired on Saturday at 10 o'clock. And, of course, we understand there will even be rebroadcast. So who's to say where the Hutchinson Report will end up next? As we move along in time, we will be expanding to other cities. So the Hutchinson Report is not just bi-coastal on Capitol Hill, but we're going national, too. Thanks again, Annette. Oh, and also, too, Hutchinson Report interviews. You can also go to our website, thehutchinsonreportnews.com. They are transcribed by Annette. We're going to give a lot more on Annette next week. She's our official transcriber. Go to thehutchinsonreportnews.com. Take a look at the great work that she's doing and also her agency is doing.